You really wore that to a billionaire's gala? The words sliced through the ballroom like glass breaking against marble. Heads turned. Champagne glasses froze midair. And at the center of it all, Victoria Hale, the 32-year-old white CEO with a body built for attention and a dress designed for headlines, let her laughter ring out. Her crimson sequin gown caught the chandelier light, daring the cameras to linger. She didn't whisper her insult. She delivered it like a toast. Her target? Amara Johnson, 46 years old, black, billionaire, CEO of Orion Global. Tonight she sat alone at a side table, dressed in a long satin gown the color of embers, not flame. A dress that whispered power instead of shouting it. Her hair was pulled into a neat low bun, her posture precise, her hands resting lightly on a crystal glass of still water. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. But to Victoria, silence looked like weakness. And in a room drunk on vanity, Amara was the perfect mark. The crowd reacted instantly. A few chuckled behind manicured hands. A hedge fund manager smirked into his whiskey. One guest murmured, "She looks like staff." Another chimed in, "Maybe she slipped past security." The ballroom wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. Amara didn't flinch. She blinked once, slowly, as if she'd heard this exact tone 100 times before. At 19, barred from a student gala because she didn't look the part. At 32, dismissed by a banker who told her billion-dollar visions didn't belong in someone like her. And now, again in a ballroom dripping with gold and arrogance, the same look, the same laugh, the same attempt to erase her. But history had taught her patience. Victoria leaned closer, wine glass swirling, her red lips curling like a blade. "Ballroom couture, darling. You should try it sometime. Oh, wait. Maybe you can't afford it." Gasps rippled. The cruelty wasn't subtle anymore. It was spectacle. Amara stayed still. One hand traced the stem of her glass, not as a fidget, but as an anchor. Her silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, waiting. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Amara. A spotlight cut across the stage for the evening's program, but the real show was happening at Amara's table. A junior journalist, camera hidden in her clutch, angled closer. A wealthy investor from Hong Kong raised an eyebrow, whispering to his wife, "She doesn't belong? Or they don't see who she is?" The seeds of doubt began to sprout in the corners of the room. Still, the majority laughed with Victoria. She was young, magnetic, fire in human form. Amara, by contrast, was quiet heat, the kind you don't notice until it consumes the room. Victoria's laughter sharpened. "Tell me, miss, whoever you are, did you sneak in hoping to meet someone important tonight?" Amara looked up at last, her gaze steady, her voice soft, but so measured it felt like steel sliding into place. "I already did." The ballroom stilled. For a second, no one understood, but Amara knew exactly what she meant. The storm had just begun. The gala at the Grand Orion Hotel wasn't just another party. It was the event of the season, a billionaire's birthday celebration turned high-stakes networking ritual. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across a ballroom lined with velvet curtains. The air smelled of French champagne and the weight of old money. Every guest was dressed like they'd walked out of a glossy magazine cover. Sequins, diamonds, designer gowns worth more than some houses. And then there was Amara Johnson. She entered without an entourage, without a press agent whispering her name to photographers, just a single presence, steady and composed. Her gown was satin orange, long and deliberate, flowing like dusk captured in fabric. It didn't scream luxury, it radiated it, in silence. Her hair was tied into a clean, low bun. Minimal jewelry, no flashing cameras followed her, and that was intentional. Tonight, she came to watch, to measure, to test the room that had so often tested her. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hale made sure everyone noticed her. 32, ambitious, the kind of CEO who built her empire less on innovation and more on spectacle. Tonight, she was spectacle personified. Her scarlet mini-dress clung like it was painted on, sequins scattering light like shards of ruby. Every step in stiletto heels was a performance. Every tilt of her head, a headline. She thrived on the spotlight and couldn't stand when someone else refused to play the same game. That refusal was Amara. Guests whispered about the contrast. She looks. Simple. Is that orange? At a gala? She didn't even bring a +1? The assumptions weren't new. They were rehearsed, inherited, recycled from centuries of rooms like this. Rooms where black women were either erased or exoticized, rarely respected. Amara knew. She had walked into them her entire life. And every time, she chose the same weapon, calm. Victoria, on the other hand, saw calm as weakness. And weakness was prey. She made sure her laugh carried when she mocked Amara's gown. She made sure her friends at the corner table hedge fund wives with diamond chokers heard every word. For her, this was sport, a public dissection. But what Victoria didn't know, what no one knew, was that Amara owned a different kind of spotlight. She didn't chase cameras. She built empires. She didn't need to sparkle. She signed checks that kept entire corporations alive, including, quietly, Victoria's. Amara sat with her back straight, eyes following the stage where a jazz quartet began playing. Her silence wasn't a retreat, it was a calculation. Every smirk, every sneer, every whispered insult was being noted, not in anger, not in shame, but in record. At 22, she had been turned away from a hotel gala for not being on the guest list, even though she held a valid invitation. She left that night and drafted the early notes for what would become her first acquisition. Now, decades later, she was back in another ballroom, facing another gatekeeper in sequins. The cycle had returned, but this time, she was the one holding the pen. Victoria raised her glass again, lips painted in arrogance. "Darling, maybe next year you'll dress like you belong." Amara looked up, her eyes steady, her lips just barely curving. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had already decided this was entertainment. But for Amara Johnson, it was evidence. And the night had only just begun. The band's saxophone curled into the air, smooth and elegant, but Victoria's voice cut sharper than any note. She leaned against the gilded table, glass in hand, eyes locked on Amara as if she'd found her evening's amusement. "Excuse me," she called loudly toward the MC standing by the stage. "Is this event still exclusive? Because I'm starting to think the guest list's gotten a little generous." A ripple of laughter, subtle at first, then louder. Several heads turned toward Amara's table. Amara didn't move. She didn't fidget. Her gaze remained steady, following the flicker of candlelight on the tablecloth. Victoria smirked, encouraged by the reaction. She raised her voice again, this time turning to her friends. "Maybe someone should check her wristband." "Security? Is she even supposed to be here?" Gasps, murmurs. The phrase "not supposed to be here" carried weight in a room built on lineage and wealth. In seconds, strangers began weaving stories about Amara. Perhaps she was staff. Perhaps she slipped in with vendors. Perhaps she was an ambitious social climber hoping to brush shoulders with the rich. The narrative wasn't true, but it was easier than confronting bias. At the corner, the young journalist with her hidden camera frowned, pressing record. She knew exactly what this was. Humiliation disguised as banter. Amara took a sip of water, calm, her gown glowing under the chandelier. Victoria wasn't finished. She turned fully toward Amara now, letting her red sequins blaze. "Sweetheart, if you're lost, the service entrance is down the hall. That dress would look perfect carrying trays." Laughter erupted, sharper this time. Someone clapped. The hedge fund manager nearly choked on his drink. For Amara, time slowed. She heard the echo of her younger self, standing outside a gala years ago, told by a doorman, "This isn't your kind of place." She remembered the sting, the quiet walk back into the night, the promise whispered only to herself, "One day, I'll own the room they threw me out of." And now here she was, same arrogance, different voice, same stage, but she was no longer the outsider they imagined. She was the architect of empires, sitting in silence while ignorance tried to play queen. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond. Her silence was both shield and sword, though no one recognized it yet. Victoria lifted her chin, reveling in the crowd's reaction. She thrived on validation, and tonight she had it in spades. Her laughter rang out, sparkling as much as her diamonds. To her, this was victory. To Amara, it was merely evidence stacking, waiting. The young journalist scribbled furiously, capturing every word. Across the room, the Hong Kong investor whispered again to his wife, this time with a frown. "They mock her, but she's composed. More than composed. She's calculating." The ballroom continued to buzz with champagne and cruelty. The line between entertainment and insult had been erased, and Amara Johnson, the woman in orange, silent under fire, let the room dig its own grave. The laughter faded into a low hum, like bees circling honey that wasn't theirs. Champagne flutes clinked, the jazz band played on, but the center of gravity in the ballroom had shifted. All eyes, knowingly or not, had fixed on Amara Johnson, and still she said nothing. Her hand rested lightly on the stem of her glass, not clenched, not trembling, just steady, as if it anchored her entire body. Her posture remained regal, back straight, shoulders relaxed. Every detail screamed composure. To the untrained eye, she seemed unmoved. But to those who watched closely, the journalist in the corner, the investor across the room, it was clear. This was not passivity. This was control. Victoria tilted her head, impatient. She was used to counterattacks, to shouting matches, to whispered apologies from people desperate to stay in her favor. Silence unnerved her. It wasn't the reaction she wanted. It wasn't surrender. It was something else, something she couldn't name. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Cat got your tongue, darling? Or do you only speak when spoken to?" Still nothing. Amara lifted her glass, took a single measured sip, and set it back down. Not a drop spilled. The ballroom noticed. People noticed. That kind of poise couldn't be taught overnight. It was carved from years of walking into hostile rooms and refusing to bow. The young journalist's pen scratched faster. She doesn't react. She absorbs. She disarms. In Amara's mind, the words replayed, "You don't belong, wrong dress, wrong place." The echoes weren't new. They were a chorus she had learned to live with. But tonight, she wasn't here to fight every insult. She was here to end the music entirely. Her silence began to work like a mirror. The more she refused to engage, the more the spotlight drifted back to Victoria, and with it, scrutiny. Guests who had laughed at first began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The joke no longer seemed sharp, it seemed desperate. Victoria's smile faltered for a split second. She masked it quickly, tossing her hair, letting her diamonds catch the light. But it was there, the tiniest crack. Amara's eyes lifted at last. Calm, steady. She didn't speak, but the weight of her gaze landed like a verdict. For a heartbeat, the room felt it, a silence heavier than applause, louder than ridicule. The investor whispered to his wife, "She's not ignoring, she's waiting." And they were right. For Amara Johnson, silence wasn't absence. It was evidence. Every laugh, every insult, every dismissive glance, she let it pile, brick by brick, into a tower too heavy for Victoria to carry. When the time came, that tower would fall, and it wouldn't be Amara who crumbled beneath it. From the edge of the ballroom, the young journalist adjusted her clutch. Inside, her phone's camera lens peeked through a slit in the fabric, capturing every word, every laugh, every sneer that Victoria hurled across the room. She hadn't expected a story tonight, just glossy coverage of champagne towers and billionaires in designer gowns. But what she was witnessing wasn't glamour. It was cruelty. And cruelty, in a room like this, was news. She pressed record. 2 tables away, Kenji Watanabe, a private equity titan from Hong Kong, studied the exchange with cool calculation. His wife leaned toward him. "Why are they mocking her?" she whispered in Mandarin. "Because they don't know who she is," he replied quietly. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe they do and they're afraid of it." He had met Amara once, years earlier, during negotiations for an acquisition in Singapore. Even then, she'd carried herself the same way, silent, deliberate, as if every second she gave you was a gift. He remembered walking away from that meeting, certain of one thing: she didn't waste words. If she wasn't speaking now, it wasn't because she couldn't, it was because she was choosing not to. Across the ballroom, murmurs began spreading. Not everyone laughed anymore. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, hiding behind their champagne flutes. The spectacle that had seemed amusing minutes ago now felt unbalanced, too sharp, too cruel. One woman whispered to her partner, "Isn't that Amara Johnson?" Her partner frowned. "No, can't be. Johnson wouldn't sit alone like that. She wouldn't dress like—" He stopped mid-sentence, because even as he said it, the possibility unsettled him. The journalist caught it all. The whispers, the shifting tone, the slow turn of the crowd from amusement to uncertainty. She scribbled a note in her phone. "Power isn't loud. It's what changes the air in the room without a word." Victoria, of course, noticed none of this. She was drunk on the attention, swirling her glass, basking in the spotlight. To her, the night was still a victory parade. She believed every smirk in the room was hers to command. But the camera was watching. The investor was watching. And the silence that Amara wielded so effortlessly was beginning to reshape the story. The gala's host, a billionaire with a golden bow tie, glanced toward the scene, frown tugging at his lips. He recognized Amara's face. He'd seen her name in boardrooms, her signature on contracts, her presence in places Victoria Hale could only dream of. Yet he said nothing. He wanted to see how far this would go. And so the stage was set. One woman in orange, silent but unshaken. One woman in red, laughing too loudly, unaware of the ground eroding beneath her heels. And around them, a circle of witnesses, some skeptical, some complicit, some already realizing they were watching a downfall in real time. The evidence was building, and the room didn't even know it was on trial. The jazz band shifted into a brighter tune, violins rising under the hum of conversation. But at the center of the ballroom, the tension wasn't music, it was a blade waiting to be drawn. Victoria Hale stood with predatory ease, her sequined dress shimmering like a warning flare. She raised her crystal glass high, swirling the dark red liquid, eyes never leaving Amara. "Well," she announced loudly, her tone coated in champagne and arrogance, "if silence is your only answer, then let me toast to that." She stepped closer, too close. Guests parted like curtains as she crossed the polished floor, heels clicking like a metronome of menace. She stopped at Amara's table, the crowd now circling, pretending to mingle while leaning in to watch. Victoria leaned over, lowering her glass toward Amara's satin gown. "Careful," she said with a smile sharp as glass. "Wouldn't want a mistake to ruin that staff-colored dress." And then it happened. A tilt of her wrist. A deliberate slip masked as an accident. A ribbon of scarlet wine cascaded over Amara's lap, staining the orange satin like blood blooming across flame. Gasps rippled through the room. A few covered their mouths. One man muttered, "Oh my God." Another chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or recoil. Victoria feigned innocence, her hand to her chest. "Oops," she said, dripping with mock concern. "Guess dry cleaning bills aren't included in charity donations." Laughter uneasy, fractured followed. Amara didn't move. She looked down at the spreading stain, then back up at Victoria. Her face was calm, her breathing even. No flicker of rage, no visible crack. Only silence, sharp and deliberate. The journalist's pen nearly tore the page. She poured wine on her. Deliberate, caught it on film. Kenji Watanabe leaned closer to his wife. "This isn't humiliation," he murmured. "This is suicide. She doesn't know who she's playing with." Victoria, drunk on her own performance, didn't see the shift in the crowd. She saw only the spotlight she thought was hers. She giggled, tossing her hair back, her diamonds scattering light. "Red looks better on you anyway," she sneered. But the room no longer laughed freely. The cruelty had crossed a line. It was no longer witty banter. It was assault dressed in sequins. Guests looked at Amara now, not with mockery but with unease, wondering, whispering, doubting. Amara placed her napkin gently over the stain, not to hide it but to mark it. Her hand moved with precision, as if recording the insult in her own quiet ledger. And in that silence, the energy of the ballroom shifted. Those who had mocked began to sense the storm building. Those who had doubted began to question their own certainty. And those who had watched closely, the journalist, the investor, the host, knew this was no accident. Victoria had just written her own downfall. The ballroom had grown restless. The spilled wine still glistened on Amara's gown, the stain deepening like a scar across fire. Conversations faltered, laughter thinned. What had once been a cruel joke now felt excessive, dangerous, but Victoria wasn't finished. She thrived on spectacle, and tonight, she wanted her victory carved into the marble of this ballroom. "Security!" Victoria's voice rang out, sharp enough to pierce through the jazz quartet. She waved her manicured hand like a queen dismissing a servant. "Someone please escort this woman out, she's clearly not supposed to be here." Gasps echoed, louder this time. Guests shifted, uncomfortable. Even the servers in white jackets froze mid-step. The young journalist's camera caught every second, her hand trembling as she whispered to herself, "She's really doing this." Two security guards at the edge of the ballroom glanced at each other, hesitant. They weren't sure. The guest list was tight, but this woman, the one in orange, carried herself with a gravity that didn't match the accusations. Still, orders were orders. They began to move through the crowd. Victoria smiled, satisfied, as though she had just delivered the closing act of her performance. She leaned closer to her friends, whispering loudly enough for the room to hear, "Some people don't understand boundaries. This is a billionaire's gala, not a community center." A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. But it was thinner now, strained, as though people weren't sure whether to keep indulging her cruelty or to distance themselves from it. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She simply adjusted the napkin covering her stained gown, her fingers precise, deliberate, as if every movement was its own form of testimony. Her face was calm, eyes lowered, but her silence filled the room like thunder waiting beyond the horizon. Kenji Watanabe whispered, sharper this time. "She's about to regret this." His wife nodded, eyes wide, sensing something in the air, something electric, inevitable. The billionaire host finally stirred, shifting uncomfortably at the head table. He recognized Amara now. The memory of signatures, contracts, and boardroom negotiations flashed in his mind. He opened his mouth as if to intervene, then stopped. Perhaps curiosity rooted him. Perhaps fear. He too wanted to see what would happen next. The security guards arrived at Amara's table, one leaning in, voice low. "Ma'am, could you come with us?" The room held its breath. Every phone not already recording was raised discreetly. Dozens of eyes, dozens of judgments, all converging on one woman. Victoria smirked, lips curling in triumph. "Yes, darling," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Time to leave. You don't belong here." For the first time all evening, Amara lifted her gaze fully, her eyes meeting Victoria's without blinking, calm, steady, ancient, like something carved from stone. And in that silence, in that stare, the crowd felt it the shift of power they couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. The storm had reached its breaking point. The ballroom had frozen in place. The guards waited. The crowd leaned in. Victoria basked in her false triumph. And then Amara moved. Not with anger, not with panic, just precision. She reached for the clutch at her side, opened it with a calmness that felt deliberate, and drew out her phone. One swipe, one tap. She lifted it to her ear, her voice smooth, unhurried, but carrying a weight that sliced through the air. "Initiate Protocol 7, she said. Every syllable landed like a gavel. The guards hesitated. They exchanged glances, sensing something they didn't understand. Victoria tilted her head, laughter bubbling. "Oh, what is this? Calling an Uber?" she sneered, tossing her hair. Her friends chuckled, but their laughter sounded forced, uncertain. On the other end of the line, a crisp voice replied instantly, "Yes, Miss Johnson, pulling up the Hale contract now." The journalist's eyes widened. She had caught the name Johnson. Her fingers flew across her notes. Amara Johnson, CEO, Orion Global. Kenji Watanabe sat straighter, his eyes narrowing. He knew. At last, he knew. The crowd, however, hadn't connected the dots yet. They still hovered between curiosity and disbelief, watching the woman in orange with a mixture of confusion and fascination. Amara continued, her voice steady, resonant enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Effective immediately. Prepare the withdrawal documents. Freeze all ongoing negotiations. Put every pending wire transfer on hold." A hush spread, broken only by the jazz band faltering mid-song as the musicians realized the room's attention had shifted entirely. The silence was thick now, heavy with something unfamiliar power moving beneath the surface. Victoria scoffed, her red lips twisting. "What, you think a phone call makes you important? You're embarrassing yourself, darling. Just leave." But her words no longer landed the same way. The energy of the room had shifted. Guests who once laughed now exchanged wary looks. The name Johnson began to circulate in whispers. "Wait, is that Amara Johnson, the Orion Global CEO? The one behind the tech mergers?" The host finally rose, his golden bow tie glinting under the chandelier. His voice, low but urgent, carried only to those near him. "If that's Amara Johnson, Victoria just made the mistake of her career." Amara ended the call, placed her phone carefully back into her clutch, and looked up, not at the guards, not at the crowd, at Victoria. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. You just tried to humiliate the woman funding your future. The words didn't need volume. They carried because of the silence that followed. And in that silence, Victoria's smirk faltered. For the first time all night, she looked unsure. The balance had shifted. The game was no longer hers. The air in the ballroom turned heavy, as if the chandeliers themselves leaned lower to listen. Victoria still stood over Amara, her crimson sequins blazing, her smirk trembling at the edges. The crowd, restless and whispering, waited for the woman in orange to either break or rise. Amara did neither. She stood slowly, her chair gliding back without a sound. The orange satin of her gown shimmered beneath the golden light, the wine stain marking it like a wound she refused to hide. Her presence grew taller, heavier, undeniable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name," she began, her gaze sweeping across the circle of faces, "is Amara Johnson." The whispers ignited instantly. "Johnson? Amara Johnson? Orion Global?" Amara's eyes locked on Victoria. Calm, icy, final. "And tonight," she continued, "you mocked the woman holding the pen over your future. I am the CEO of Orion Global, the principal funder of the Hale merger, the $4.9 billion deal that keeps your empire afloat." The words landed like thunder. The crowd gasped, some outright shouting. Glasses clinked against the floor as a server dropped a tray. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another, louder, "She owns the deal." Victoria's face drained of color. Her red lips parted, but no sound emerged. For the first time all night, she looked small, a flame caught in its own smoke. Amara stepped forward, the room parting for her as though pulled by gravity. Her voice carried without strain. "You poured wine on me. You called security on me. You told me I don't belong. But here's the truth. Without me, you don't belong. Without my signature, Hale Corporation collapses before sunrise." Phones rose higher, recording every second. The journalist's heart pounded as she whispered into her mic. She just flipped the entire narrative. This is history. Kenji Watanabe smiled faintly, a knowing gleam in his eye. "I told you," he murmured to his wife. She was calculating. Around the ballroom, faces transformed, the smirks gone, replaced with awe, fear, respect. Guests who had laughed minutes earlier now straightened, pretending they had never joined in. The billionaire host tugged nervously at his bow tie, realizing the gala he had staged had become Amara's stage instead. Victoria stumbled back a step, her heel catching the hem of her own dress. She tried to recover, voice breaking. This is absurd. You're bluffing." But Amara didn't flinch. She leaned in, her tone soft, lethal. "Check your inbox. The contract just vanished." Victoria's phone buzzed in her clutch. She fumbled, her fingers shaking. And when she looked at the screen, the blood drained from her face. The deal gone. And in that moment, the woman in orange wasn't just a guest. She was the storm. The silence that had unnerved the room all night revealed itself for what it truly was: power, waiting for its moment. Amara Johnson had arrived. Victoria's laughter, the weapon she had wielded all night, was gone. Her throat clenched, her sequins no longer glittered, and the wine glass in her hand trembled until she set it down with a sharp clink. Her face, once painted with smug confidence, was now a mask of panic. The ballroom saw it. Every guest who had once smirked, whispered, or joined her cruelty now shifted in their seats. Some looked away, ashamed. Others pulled out their phones, pretending they hadn't laughed along. But it was too late. The room had already chosen its new center of gravity, and it wasn't Victoria Hale. The billionaire host cleared his throat, voice uneasy. "Miss Johnson," but he stopped. He wasn't sure what to say. Power had already spoken. Anything else would only echo it. Across the room, the journalist whispered into her recorder, hands trembling with adrenaline. "She's not just in control. She's dismantling her in real time. This isn't a scene, this is a verdict." Victoria took a shaky step forward. Her voice cracked as she tried to recover. "Listen, this was a misunderstanding, a joke taken too far. We're all here to celebrate, and—" "Number." Amara's voice, calm and low, cut sharper than a shout. The single word silenced the room. Even the band stopped playing mid-note, as if obeying a command none of them had heard before. Amara's eyes fixed on Victoria, unblinking. "You weren't joking. You humiliated me because you thought you could. You called security because you believed I didn't belong. You poured wine on me because you mistook cruelty for power. and now the truth stands in front of you. Do you still feel powerful?" Victoria opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her body language betrayed her, arms crossing, shoulders shrinking. The red dress that had once screamed dominance now looked like a costume slipping off its actor. Kenji Watanabe spoke loudly enough for others to hear. "That's the problem with arrogance. It doesn't know when it's already lost." Heads turned toward him, nods rippling across the room. The crowd's shift became visible. A woman in diamonds who had once laughed now raised her glass slightly toward Amara, as if in apology. The servers, once frozen in hesitation, moved again, but now with subtle deference, pouring fresh water at Amara's table, clearing away empty glasses, as though reclaiming her space from the insult. Victoria, desperate, turned to her circle of friends. "Say something. Tell her." But they avoided her eyes. One by one, they stepped back, distancing themselves. Her empire of validation crumbled, not with fire, but with silence. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply stood, tall and unwavering, her orange gown now more radiant than any sequin in the room. The wine stain wasn't humiliation anymore, it was a mark of survival, a reminder of the line crossed and the empire undone. The journalist whispered again, her voice breaking with awe. She flipped the entire room. Victoria's isolated, the queen without a court. And indeed, in the glittering heart of the ballroom, surrounded by cameras, diamonds, and silence, Victoria Hale was no longer the center of attention. She was the cautionary tale unraveling before everyone's eyes. Amara Johnson had claimed the room. The ballroom held its breath, suspended in the silence that followed Victoria's collapse. The chandeliers still glittered, but their light no longer crowned her. It crowned the woman in orange who now stood at the center of the storm she had endured and mastered. Amara's hands were steady, clasped lightly in front of her. She didn't need to raise her voice. Every ear strained for her words. Every phone recorded. Every witness leaned forward, aware they were standing inside a story that would be told long after tonight. "I came here quietly," Amara began, her tone calm, deliberate. "I didn't ask for attention. I didn't demand a spotlight, but arrogance has a way of dragging dignity into the open." She turned slightly, addressing not just Victoria, but the entire glittering assembly. "You wanted to know if I belonged here. So let me be clear. I don't just belong. I own the room. My company holds the controlling interest in the Hale merger. $4.9 billion. 4.9 billion reasons this corporation breathes tomorrow." Gasps, murmurs. Someone at the back whispered, "She controls the deal." Another voice louder, "She can end Hale tonight." Amara's eyes swept the room, pausing on the host, on the investors, on the journalists scribbling with frantic urgency. "And as of this moment, that deal no longer exists. I am canceling the merger. Effective immediately." The words struck like a hammer. The crowd erupted. Some gasped aloud. Others muttered frantically into their phones, already alerting offices and partners. The journalist nearly dropped her recorder, whispering, "She just killed a $4.9 billion contract. Live." Victoria staggered forward, face pale beneath the chandelier's golden glow. "No, you can't!" Her voice cracked, desperation spilling into the silence she once commanded. "Do you know what you're doing? You'll ruin." Amara cut her off with a single glance. Her calm was unshaken, her authority absolute. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I am removing my name, my money, and my power from those who mistake cruelty for strength. Deals built on arrogance collapse on their own. I'm just saving time." The ballroom buzzed with shock, awe, even admiration. Kenji Watanabe nodded firmly, raising his glass toward Amara. "That," he said, voice steady, "is what leadership looks like." Others followed, subtle at first, then bolder a ripple of raised glasses in salute. Victoria's hands shook as she clutched her phone, refreshing her inbox, watching her empire unravel in real time. Her friends turned away, her allies melted into the crowd, her spotlight extinguished. And at the center stood Amara, calm and radiant, her wine-stained gown transformed into an emblem of resilience. She had entered as a target. She now stood as the judge. The verdict was final. $4.9 billion gone, and with it, the illusion of Victoria Hale's power. The ballroom was no longer the same. Moments ago, it had been a theater of arrogance and spectacle. Now, it was a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered. The sentence, $4.9 billion withdrawn, arrogance exposed, power redefined. Amara Johnson did not linger. She had no interest in basking in applause or watching Victoria unravel further. That wasn't her way. Quiet power doesn't gloat, it leaves echoes behind. She placed her napkin gently on the table, covering the last trace of spilled wine. The stain was no longer humiliation. It was a scar turned into a crown. She adjusted her gown, straightened her shoulders, and began to walk. The crowd parted instantly. No one stopped her. No one dared. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others raised their glasses in silent respect. The journalist kept her camera steady, whispering, "She's leaving," on her own terms. Each step of her heels against the marble floor sounded louder than the jazz band could ever play. Louder than Victoria's laughter had been. Louder than the murmurs still rippling through the stunned assembly. It was the sound of dignity reclaiming its space. Victoria, trembling, tried one last time. "Wait, we can fix this. We can talk." Amara paused only long enough to glance over her shoulder. Her voice, steady and low, carried across the entire ballroom. "Respect is not negotiable. Not at $4, not at $4 billion, not ever." The words cut through the chandeliers, the velvet curtains, the very air itself. A line etched permanently into the memory of everyone present. Then she turned back and continued walking, unhurried, unshaken. The doors opened wide, and she stepped into the night, her orange gown catching the city lights as though it carried fire within it. Behind her, silence lingered. The kind of silence that doesn't fade, it settles, reshapes, redefines. Kenji Watanabe lifted his glass one final time, voice solemn. Dignity doesn't need a stage, it creates one. The journalist lowered her phone, her heart racing. She knew tomorrow's headline would write itself. Black CEO mocked at Gala, then she erased a $4.9 billion empire. But for Amara Johnson, there were no headlines in her mind. Only the same steady promise she had carried all her life, never to shout for space in rooms that doubted her, but to build the kind of power that made those rooms hers. And as the heavy doors closed behind her, the ballroom remained frozen, haunted by the quiet strength of the woman they had tried and failed to dismiss. Amara did not stay to see the aftermath. She didn't need to. Her presence, her silence, her power had already rewritten it.